He's intelligent, successful, and physically attractive. On paper, he should be irresistible to women. He earns 6 figures, owns his home, stays in shape, and has an active social life. Yet he hasn't had a meaningful relationship in 3 years. He watches less accomplished men effortlessly attract and keep high-quality women, while he struggles to get past first dates. When asked what's holding him back, he'll tell you about market conditions, female hypergamy, social media destroying attention spans, or any number of external factors, but there's something he won't mention because he doesn't recognize it in himself. Something that sabotages every potential relationship before it begins. Something that women can sense within minutes of meeting him. It's not his appearance, his income, or his personality. It's something far more fundamental and far more correctable. It's the invisible force that keeps capable men perpetually single, while confident men with fewer resources build lasting partnerships with the women those capable men desire. Today, I'm going to expose the hidden weakness that destroys more male romantic success than any other factor, reveal why this weakness is epidemic among modern men, and most importantly, show you how to eliminate it completely so you can finally access the relationships you've been capable of having all along. What separates men who succeed with women from men who struggle isn't talent, looks, money, or even social skills. It's the absence of what I call the invisible saboteur, a psychological force that operates beneath conscious awareness while systematically destroying romantic opportunities. This saboteur is what most people call fear, but it's not simple nervousness or anxiety. It's something much more specific and much more devastating. The prioritization of emotional comfort over meaningful goals. It's the unconscious decision to avoid discomfort even when that avoidance guarantees failure. The invisible saboteur operates through what I call the comfort preservation protocol, an internal system that constantly calculates how to minimize emotional risk, social awkwardness, and potential rejection. This protocol feels protective, but it actually ensures that men never access the experiences they claim to want. This saboteur manifests differently in different men, but it always serves the same function, protecting them from the temporary discomfort that leads to lasting satisfaction. It convinces them that avoiding short-term pain is more important than achieving long-term pleasure. The invisible saboteur is particularly insidious because it disguises itself as rationality. Men who are controlled by it believe they're being logical, strategic, or prudent when they're actually being governed by fear. They create elaborate justifications for avoidance behaviors while remaining unconscious of their true motivations. Understanding the invisible saboteur requires recognizing that it's not the presence of fear that destroys romantic success. It's the obedience to fear. Every man feels anxious about approaching women, handling conflict, or taking leadership roles. The difference is whether they let that anxiety guide their behavior. The saboteur also operates by making men more afraid of temporary discomfort than permanent dissatisfaction. They become so focused on avoiding momentary awkwardness that they condemn themselves to years of loneliness and frustration. The most visible manifestation of the invisible saboteur is what I call the approach paralysis pandemic, a widespread inability among men to initiate contact with women they find attractive. This pandemic has created a generation of men who can theoretically attract women but practically remain isolated. Approach paralysis operates through what I call the rejection amplification matrix, a psychological system that makes potential rejection feel more threatening than actual loneliness. Men caught in this matrix become more afraid of a woman saying no than of never asking the question. This paralysis manifests as endless preparation without execution. Men study attraction principles, perfect their appearance, practice conversations in mirrors, and develop elaborate strategies for meeting women, but never actually approach women they're attracted to. They become experts at everything except the one behavior that matters. The approach paralysis pandemic also includes what I call the excuse generation engine, an internal system that creates seemingly logical reasons to avoid approaching attractive women. She's wearing headphones, she looks busy, she's probably taken, she's out of my league, this isn't the right time or place. This pandemic creates what I call the opportunity evaporation effect, where men recognize attraction opportunities but fail to act on them until the opportunities disappear. They spend their lives surrounded by potential partners they never engage with because engagement requires tolerating discomfort. The paralysis is particularly devastating because it's self-reinforcing. The longer men avoid approaching women, the more intimidating approaching becomes. The less practice they get with real interactions, the more they rely on theoretical knowledge that proves worthless in practical situations. Approach paralysis pandemic also creates what I call the regret accumulation syndrome, where men spend years wondering what if about women they never approached. This accumulated regret often becomes more painful than rejection ever could have been. Understanding this pandemic reveals why dating apps have become so popular among men despite producing terrible results. Apps allow men to pursue women without risking face-to-face rejection, but they also eliminate the authentic connection that comes from real-world interaction. Beyond approach, paralysis lies an even more destructive manifestation of the invisible saboteur, what I call the emotional capitulation crisis, the tendency for men to abandon their standards, boundaries, and objectives when women display emotional distress. The emotional capitulation crisis operates through what I call the comfort restoration impulse. An overwhelming urge to eliminate female emotional discomfort even when doing so contradicts men's best interest or stated goals. This impulse transforms rational decision-makers into emotional reactors. This crisis manifests when women become angry, sad, disappointed, or frustrated, and men immediately prioritize alleviating those emotions over maintaining their own positions. They make concessions, change plans, abandon standards, and compromise values to restore emotional equilibrium. The emotional capitulation crisis also includes what I call the manipulation vulnerability window, a psychological state where men become susceptible to influence techniques, specifically because they can't tolerate female emotional distress. Women learn to exploit this vulnerability to override male judgment. This crisis creates what I call the relationship hostage dynamic, where men become prisoners of women's emotional states. They lose the ability to make independent decisions because every choice is filtered through the question, will this upset her? The emotional capitulation crisis is particularly destructive because it teaches women that emotional displays are effective tools for controlling male behavior. This lesson encourages more frequent and more intense emotional manipulation rather than healthy communication. The crisis also creates what I call the authenticity erosion effect, where men progressively abandon their genuine preferences and perspectives to avoid triggering female emotional responses. They become edited versions of themselves rather than authentic partners. Understanding the emotional capitulation crisis reveals why many men find themselves in relationships that don't serve their interests. They agree to terms and conditions they never actually accepted because they couldn't tolerate the discomfort of negotiation. Perhaps the most culturally destructive manifestation of the invisible saboteur is what I call the leadership abdication syndrome, the widespread male refusal to take charge in relationships because they're afraid of being judged, criticized, or labeled as controlling. The leadership abdication syndrome operates through what I call the equality confusion matrix, a psychological framework that equates leadership with oppression and mistakes taking charge with taking advantage. This matrix makes men afraid to exercise natural masculine capabilities. This syndrome manifests as endless consultation, decision paralysis, and responsibility avoidance. Men caught in this syndrome ask permission for everything, defer to female preferences automatically, and refuse to express preferences that might conflict with women's desires. The leadership abdication syndrome also includes what I call the social approval dependency, an overwhelming need for women to validate their decisions and perspectives before they feel confident implementing them. This dependency eliminates the decisive confidence that women find attractive. This syndrome creates what I call the direction vacuum effect, where relationships lack clear leadership and drift aimlessly because no one is willing to take responsibility for outcomes. This vacuum often leads to female frustration and eventual departure. The leadership abdication syndrome is particularly damaging because it contradicts what most women actually desire in relationships. Despite social messaging about equality, most women prefer men who can make decisions, provide direction, and take responsibility for outcomes. The syndrome also creates what I call the masculine atrophy process, where men's natural leadership capabilities deteriorate from disuse. The longer they avoid taking charge, the less capable they become of doing so effectively when situations require it. Understanding the leadership abdication syndrome reveals why many modern relationships fail, despite both parties being good people with compatible values. Without clear leadership, relationships become committee projects that satisfy no one. Underlying all manifestations of the invisible saboteur is what I call the scarcity prison system, a psychological framework that makes men more afraid of losing inadequate relationships than of never finding adequate relationships. The scarcity prison system operates through what I call the option depletion delusion, the belief that current romantic opportunities represent the best or only opportunities available. This delusion makes men willing to accept poor treatment rather than risk being alone. This prison system manifests as tolerance for disrespect, acceptance of one-sided arrangements, and unwillingness to enforce boundaries that might cause relationship endings. Men trapped in this system become prisoners of their own desperation. The scarcity prison system also includes what I call the sunk cost relationship trap, the tendency to remain in unsatisfying relationships because of time, energy, or resources already invested. This trap prevents men from making rational decisions about relationship continuation. This system creates what I call the standards degradation spiral, where men progressively lower their expectations to match their available options rather than improving their options to match their standards. This spiral leads to relationships that feel more like settlements than partnerships. The scarcity prison system is particularly destructive because it makes men grateful for relationships that should make them disappointed. They become so focused on having someone that they lose sight of, whether that someone enhances their lives. The prison system also creates what I call the improvement resistance effect, where men avoid developing themselves because improvement might reveal that their current relationships are inadequate. They prefer comfortable dissatisfaction to uncomfortable growth. Understanding the scarcity prison system reveals why many men remain in relationships that obviously don't serve them. They're not staying because the relationships are good, they're staying because they're afraid the alternatives are worse. What makes the invisible saboteur so powerful is what I call the fear hierarchy inversion, a psychological arrangement where men become more afraid of temporary social discomfort than of permanent life dissatisfaction. The fear hierarchy inversion operates by making immediate social risks feel more threatening than long-term personal costs. Men caught in this inversion will endure years of loneliness to avoid minutes of potential embarrassment. This inversion manifests as preferring familiar dissatisfaction to unfamiliar possibility. Men choose known disappointment over unknown opportunity because disappointment feels safer than risk, even when risk offers the only path to satisfaction. The fear hierarchy inversion also includes what I call the comfort zone fortification process, the systematic strengthening of reasons to avoid challenging situations. This fortification makes men experts at justifying their limitations rather than overcoming them. This inversion creates what I call the regret manufacturing system, where men make decisions that guarantee future regret to avoid present discomfort. They choose certainty of disappointment over uncertainty of success. The fear hierarchy inversion is particularly damaging because it makes men their own worst enemies. They sabotage their own goals to protect themselves from experiences that might actually help them achieve those goals. The inversion also creates what I call the confidence paradox, where men need confidence to take actions that would build confidence. This paradox keeps them trapped in cycles of inactivity and self-doubt. Understanding the fear hierarchy inversion reveals why logical advice often fails to change male behavior. Men aren't making logical decisions. They're making emotional decisions guided by inverted priorities. The invisible saboteur gains its power through what I call the comfort addiction epidemic, a widespread dependency on emotional predictability that makes men unable to tolerate the uncertainty required for growth and success. The comfort addiction epidemic operates through what I call the discomfort avoidance protocol, an internal system that treats any form of social, emotional, or psychological discomfort as an emergency to be eliminated immediately, rather than a challenge to be overcome. This epidemic manifests as choosing safety over opportunity, predictability over possibility, and familiarity over fulfillment. Men caught in this epidemic build lives that feel secure but ultimately prove unsatisfying. The comfort addiction epidemic also includes what I call the sensation-numbing effect, the progressive loss of ability to tolerate normal human emotions like anxiety, nervousness, and uncertainty. This numbing makes ordinary social interactions feel overwhelming. This epidemic creates what I call the experience limitation syndrome, where men's worlds become progressively smaller as they avoid more and more situations that might cause discomfort. They end up living limited lives to protect themselves from unlimited possibilities. The comfort addiction epidemic is particularly destructive because it disguises itself as wisdom. Men caught in it believe they're being prudent and rational when they're actually being controlled by their need for emotional predictability. The epidemic also creates what I call the growth resistance framework, where men unconsciously resist opportunities for development because development requires temporary discomfort. They prefer stagnation that feels comfortable to progress, that feels challenging. Understanding the comfort addiction epidemic reveals why many men never achieve their potential despite having the capability. They're not lacking talent, they're lacking tolerance for the discomfort that talent development requires. Breaking free from the invisible saboteur requires what I call the courage cultivation protocol, a systematic approach to developing comfort with discomfort and building tolerance for the uncertainty that accompanies all meaningful action. The courage cultivation protocol operates through what I call the discomfort desensitization process, gradually exposing yourself to the types of social and emotional challenges that you've been avoiding. This process builds psychological resilience through controlled exposure. This protocol includes what I call the fear subordination practice, learning to acknowledge fear without obeying it. This practice involves feeling anxious about approaching women, handling conflict, or taking leadership while taking action despite those feelings. The courage cultivation protocol also involves what I call the outcome independence training, developing the ability to pursue goals without being attached to specific results. This training eliminates the perfectionism that often prevents action. This protocol creates what I call the confidence-building loop, where each act of courage increases capacity for future acts of courage. This loop gradually transforms men who avoid challenges into men who seek them. The courage cultivation protocol also includes what I call the values clarification exercise, identifying what matters more to you than comfort and using those values to motivate action when emotions resist. This exercise provides direction when feelings provide only resistance. Understanding the courage cultivation protocol reveals that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to act despite fear. Men don't need to eliminate anxiety, they need to stop letting anxiety control their behaviour. The protocol also demonstrates that courage is a skill that can be developed rather than a trait you're born with. Men who seem naturally confident have simply practiced courage more consistently than men who seem naturally timid. The ultimate goal of overcoming the invisible saboteur is what I call the masculine reclamation project, the process of reclaiming authentic masculine behaviour that has been suppressed by fear, social conditioning, and comfort addiction. The masculine reclamation project operates through what I call the natural expression liberation, allowing yourself to behave according to your genuine impulses and preferences, rather than edited versions designed to avoid conflict or criticism. This project includes what I call the leadership restoration process, gradually resuming the decision-making, direction-setting and responsibility-taking roles that feel natural but have been abandoned due to social pressure or fear of judgment. The masculine reclamation project also involves what I call the boundary establishment campaign, learning to say no to requests, demands and expectations that conflict with your values or goals, regardless of others' emotional responses to those boundaries. This project creates what I call the authenticity attraction effect, where women begin responding positively to your genuine self rather than your performed self. This effect often surprises men who expected authenticity to be less attractive than performance. The masculine reclamation project also includes what I call the mission prioritization framework, organizing your life around your goals and values rather than around others' comfort or approval. This framework ensures that your decisions serve your long-term interests. Understanding the masculine reclamation project reveals that most of what men think women want from them actually repels women. Women are attracted to authentic masculine energy, not to sanitized versions designed to avoid offense. The project also demonstrates that reclaiming masculinity isn't about becoming aggressive or domineering. It's about becoming decisive, confident, and unapologetically goal-oriented while remaining respectful and considerate. Converting theoretical understanding into practical transformation requires what I call the liberation implementation system, a structured approach to systematically eliminating fear-based behaviours and replacing them with courage-based alternatives. The liberation implementation system operates through what I call the progressive challenge method, starting with small acts of courage and gradually increasing the difficulty until you can handle the most intimidating situations with confidence. This system includes what I call the daily courage quota, committing to performing at least one action each day that feels uncomfortable but serves your goals. This quota ensures consistent progress toward courage development. The liberation implementation system also involves what I call the discomfort reframing technique, learning to interpret anxiety, nervousness, and uncertainty as signs that you're moving in the right direction rather than warnings to retreat. This system creates what I call the momentum amplification effect, where each successful act of courage makes the next act easier. This effect accelerates progress and builds unstoppable confidence. The liberation implementation system also includes what I call the support network optimization, surrounding yourself with people who encourage courage rather than people who enable comfort addiction. This optimization provides environmental support for behavioral change. Understanding the liberation implementation system reveals that transformation requires systematic practice rather than motivational inspiration. Reading about courage won't make you courageous. Practicing courage will make you courageous. The system also demonstrates that most men already know what they need to do to improve their romantic lives. They don't need more information, they need more courage to act on the information they already possess. One of the most crucial aspects of overcoming the invisible saboteur is developing what I call the emotional resilience architecture, a comprehensive framework for handling negative emotions without letting them control your behavior or decision-making processes. The emotional resilience architecture operates through what I call the feeling-action separation protocol, the ability to experience intense emotions while maintaining control over your behavioral responses. This protocol prevents emotional states from dictating life choices. This architecture includes what I call the distress tolerance training, systematically building your capacity to sit with uncomfortable emotions like anxiety, sadness, anger, or frustration without immediately acting to eliminate them. This training reveals that emotions are temporary experiences rather than permanent states. The emotional resilience architecture also involves what I call the reaction choice framework, recognizing that while you cannot control what you feel, you can always control how you respond to those feelings. This framework empowers conscious decision-making even during emotional turbulence. This architecture creates what I call the emotional weather system understanding, viewing emotions as temporary atmospheric conditions that will naturally change rather than permanent climate patterns that define your reality. This understanding reduces the urgency to escape negative emotional states. The emotional resilience architecture also includes what I call the sensation acceptance practice, learning to experience physical manifestations of anxiety, nervousness, or fear without interpreting them as signals to retreat. This practice transforms anxiety from a stop sign into information. Understanding the emotional resilience architecture reveals that emotional strength isn't about not feeling negative emotions. It's about feeling them fully while acting, according to your values rather than your immediate emotional impulses. The architecture also demonstrates that men who seem naturally confident aren't men who don't feel fear. They're men who have developed superior skills for functioning effectively despite feeling fear. Another critical component of defeating the invisible saboteur is building what I call the social pressure immunity system, a psychological defense against the opinions, judgments, and expectations of others that often keep men trapped in fear-based behavior patterns. The social pressure immunity system operates through what I call the external validation independence protocol, developing internal standards for success and satisfaction that don't require approval from others to maintain. This protocol eliminates the need to modify your behavior based on others' comfort levels. This system includes what I call the judgment deflection capability, the ability to receive criticism, disapproval, or negative reactions without internalizing them as accurate assessments of your worth or correctness. This capability protects your self-concept from external attack. The social pressure immunity system also involves what I call the authenticity protection framework, maintaining your genuine personality, preferences, and goals even when they conflict with social expectations or popular opinion. This framework ensures that your life serves your vision rather than others' comfort. This system creates what I call the influence filter effect, the ability to distinguish between feedback that serves your growth and feedback that serves others' control agendas. This filter helps you benefit from legitimate guidance while resisting manipulative pressure. The social pressure immunity system also includes what I call the mission priority hierarchy, organizing your decision-making around your core objectives rather than around social approval or conflict avoidance. This hierarchy ensures that important decisions serve important goals. Understanding the social pressure immunity system reveals that much of what men interpret as caring about others is actually fear of others' reactions. True consideration involves pursuing what's genuinely beneficial rather than what's socially comfortable. The system also demonstrates that people who try to control your behaviour through emotional pressure are typically operating from their own insecurities rather than concern for your well-being. If this analysis of the hidden weakness that keeps men single has revealed patterns you recognise in your own behaviour, subscribe to this channel for more insights into overcoming the psychological barriers that prevent romantic success. Hit that notification bell, because understanding these patterns could transform your approach to dating and relationships forever. Share this video with any man who needs to understand that his romantic struggles aren't caused by external factors he can't control, but by internal factors he can completely transform through conscious effort and practice. Remember, the women you want are attracted to courage, not comfort. The relationships you desire are available to men who can tolerate discomfort in service of their goals. The success you seek is waiting on the other side of the fears you've been avoiding. Your romantic failures aren't proof that you're inadequate. They're proof that you've been prioritizing the wrong thing. When you start prioritizing courage over comfort, action over safety, and goals over feelings, everything changes. The Invisible Sabotur has kept you single long enough. It's time to choose temporary discomfort over permanent disappointment. It's time to feel the fear and act anyway. It's time to reclaim the confident, decisive, courageous man you were meant to be.